The ability to communicate with non-technical professionals as an engineer is critical. It's critical in getting your projects approved and really just getting things done. In today's episode, I have with me Jackie Dirmann. Jackie is a licensed professional engineer. She's also a municipal engineer and client manager at T&M Associates. Jackie gives tons of great tips in this episode on how you can communicate effectively with people that don't speak engineering, whether they're residents or board members that you need to get projects approved by. She gives some awesome tips for active and proactive communication. Let's jump in. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the podcast for today. Jackie Dirmann is a licensed professional engineer. She's also a municipal engineer and client manager at T&M Associates. Jackie, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So we're excited to have you here, and I wanted to just start off by maybe you can tell our audience a little bit about your career and what brought you to be a municipal engineer at T&M Associates.
Sure. About 24 years ago, I came to this country. I graduated from the University of the Philippines, and that was before 9/11. And I was able to get a job as an entry-level engineer working on telecommunications towers and antennas. I did that for 2 years, and then that kind of died down, and they had to transfer us to different departments, and they chose for me to go to a municipal engineering department. I didn't know anything about it about 20 years ago, and that's where I stayed because I loved it. I loved working with residents and the governing body and talking to people and fixing their problems. And that's essentially how I ended up doing municipal engineering for 20 years.
Yeah, I think that's kind of important because I think in civil engineering, there's a lot of different directions someone could go. And I know for me, when I graduated, I ended up in land development, but that's not something that I knew what it was when I graduated college. So the point being that even if you're a practicing civil engineer for many years, there may still be something else in civil engineering that you haven't done yet, that you want to try, that you're going to get into. And I think that's kind of one of the exciting things about our industry. So we're going to talk a lot today about communication. We know it's one of the most critical aspects of civil engineering, of project management, of life in general. So we're going to talk about it at many different levels of our projects today. And you've had a lot of experience as a consulting engineer and as a municipal engineer. Talk to us about how you approach communication with different project stakeholders, especially municipalities where community involvement is so important on your projects.
Sure. Well, early on, you have to get the right people in the room, people that actually want to listen to you, listen about the project so that they can tell you, what it is they want you to do. Do they want you to just pave a road? Are there issues with a road? Do they want you to just replace a playground, fix flooding? So it's important to get the right people in the room and to try to listen to them and try to understand what they want out of this project. Once you have that, do the engineering part in the background, but come back with options, costs, timeframes in a way that you could talk to them and they understand what you're saying. Don't talk in technical terms, just make the information concise. You know that people don't really engineering is not the most exciting thing in the world. So you have to connect with them and that they understand what you're saying. So you do that early on. And as the project progresses, you release more information depending on, who you need to talk to, especially the governing body. You need to try to get them to understand what you're trying to solve for them, how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take, because they don't understand. They think that once they, give you money, that it can be done in 6 months. And usually it's 2 to 3 years.
Yep. Right. Yeah. No, I think that's great. And kind of one of the things I take away from that is you can't just understand what they want to do, but you kind of have to have a feel for why they want to do it, right? Like what's behind that? Was it causing some kind of issue in their community? Is there a funding that they're trying to get? Is there something going on that you're not really aware of? And I think as engineers, we're constantly looking for like the black and white technical answers to the problem, but we need to dig a little deeper. We need to connect with people. We need to understand kind of their reasons and their goals for wanting to do something. And that can make it a lot easier. I know for us at EMI, we do a lot of learning and development programs. And if a company contacts us and says we need PM training, my first question is, why do you need PM training? Right? Well, like we even have a lot of write-offs, or our PMs can't communicate effectively, or, we're losing our PMs, or whatever the case may be. So I definitely think in any project you work on, probably in all walks of life, connecting with people at the beginning, understanding what they're looking to accomplish, but just as importantly as why they want to accomplish it, can be helpful. And I think Jackie's point there about engineering too, is that a lot of times in these meetings, you're dealing with people that aren't technical. Right. And you need to try to kind of relay technical information, or at least technical solutions to them. So I think understanding what they're looking for can be helpful for that, and just practice can also help with that. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you about is maybe you could talk through some of the strategies that you use to keep the public informed and engaged throughout the life cycle of a public project, like a capital improvements project, for example.
Sure. Okay, the one that's probably the most impactful is one right at your doorstep, which is probably a road job that involves drainage and utility relocations. That usually takes a very long time because you have all these different contractors coming in and out of the site, and the public doesn't really understand what's going on. So what I've done in the past is, once we know that we have a project and I've narrowed down the scope with the governing body sometimes likes to send out a letter to the affected residents to say, hey, we've engaged this firm. They're preparing designs to do this scope, bullet points, nothing in a paragraph, just all bullet points, a new road, new underground stormwater, sanitary, all just bullet points, and give them timeframes in seasons, whether it's spring, summer, fall. These are the timeframes for the project. These are the limits of the project. Once we have a little bit more detail, we'll get back to you. So we usually do that. Some of my clients, they usually do that as soon as funding is engaged. Maybe about, 6 months later, once the project is substantially complete and designed, we send out another flyer to residents to say, plans are substantially complete. We've uploaded it to our website. You could take a look. But in the meantime, we're setting up a neighborhood meeting on your street where the engineer will be there with plans, with hard copies of plans that are also on the website, where she'll explain what the different aspects of the project is. We've gone out to bid. We have a contractor. That contractor will come with us, and he or she will also answer questions. So at that point, we select a time after 5:30 to meet with the residents, and I go over and I explain the project. I introduce the contractor. I introduce the folks from the town that have employed us or that I've been working with to determine the scope of the project. And the residents can ask, what are you doing in front of my driveway? Because sometimes online, they don't understand what the plans mean. So after about 10 minutes of talking about the project, there's really a back and forth between us. And that's when, we could really get into discussions of, well, why did you do this? Why did you do that? During that time, we collect email addresses. So once we leave, we don't just go away. We tell them that the contractor has to send out notices to them before he or she arrives. But we also give them maybe like once every 2 weeks, we'll give them a status update. Hey, the gas company's coming. This is what they're going to do. They're going to be there for, 3 or 4 months. Now the water is coming. So every step of the way, they have some idea of the progress of this project, and they have a person that they can contact in case they have any questions.
That's great. I really like that. And, I think something that's important to note there is I think as engineers, we think of new roadway, new service line. That's great, right? But people are like, stay off my property. Like, I don't want construction. I don't want annoyances. I don't want any interruptions to my daily life. So just because we think it's a great new thing for them, it may not be the same perspective that they have. So I think when you're approaching someone, and Jackie gave us some good tips for doing this, you need to think about it from their perspective and that they may not be as happy about this project as we think they might be. And so that's something I think we need to be aware of, because you might have to be dealing with them and they'll have a kind of a little bit of a negative attitude because of the change that's happening on their property. Now, Jackie, you mentioned something there that I think is important that I want to talk a little bit more about, which is the contractor. You mentioned kind of getting them involved, introducing the contractor. How important is it to involve the contractors kind of early on in the communication with the residents and stakeholders? How can that impact the success of the project overall?
So it's extremely important, and contractors have fought me in coming to these meetings because they also don't, they really just want to get in there and get out of there, right? But we make them come to the meetings because they are the people that the residents are going to see on a daily basis. We have our inspector there, but the contractor impacts, everything for the residents. So they can ask the contractor questions. Are you going to block my driveway? When am I going to know? He's really going to be able to answer their questions more than I can because he controls the site. So it's extremely important. In fact, one of the most successful projects we've had recently was because a contractor had a designated person that would just answer questions to the residents. They would send him in before it started. He would knock on doors. We got so many accolades about that project because of that one person that could just communicate with people on a daily basis. And he was hired by the contractor, the only contractor that I know that hired one person specifically to just talk to people and explain the project.
That's great. And that tells you a lot about, I think, the resident, in that they want to kind of feel like they're being heard, right? And they want to have someone that they could talk to on a regular basis, someone that they can reach out to so that they feel like someone is focused on them, right? And their success in the project or their property or whatever the case may be. So I think that's great. Well, I think number one, that's great advice just in terms of engaging the contractor early on and convincing them to be very engaged in the process. And I think as a bonus there, that second point about the contractor actually having someone to interact with the residents. I know you don't see that all the time, but it sounds like that was a kind of a game changer in that project.
It was in a downtown of a busy city with all sorts of underground work happening. And I could count in my hands how many times I got a panic call for a 6-month project.
Wow. That's awesome. That's great. So I know that you deal with a lot of compliance issues when you're working on these types of projects related to zoning regs, stormwater management. How do you kind of balance those technical requirements with the concerns of the local communities or the local residents that aren't necessarily thinking about the technical requirements? You're kind of having to deal with a lot of expectations from different people here.
Right. You're correct. There's a lot of technical requirements dealing with a project, not just the technical requirements, but also grant requirements. And they don't quite understand that, but once you say that, for example, most of these projects are grant funded. Once you say that we're accepting this money so that you're paying less in your taxes for this project, these are the requirements that come with it. They understand that there's rules to the game. And the more you can explain it in a way that they can hear it, you break it down to in a non-technical way, they will accept it. For example, I had a project that they wanted us to put curbing in the road. And it was a very narrow road. And if I had to put curbing down, I would have to designate that road as a one-way street because it now restricts the travel way. And they didn't want it. They said, it's an existing road. We can't, why do you have to do it? And I said, the fire department can't go through this road right now. We can't make it worse for them by putting curb. We went back and forth. on the road, back and forth, we argued. But after I explained to them that it was RSIS, that it was a requirement, that it was not safe, they accepted it. And it was better to have that conversation then and there before the machines came than when the machines came and they're trying to get something done or that we couldn't help them with. So when you explain it in as many different ways as you can, they will understand what you're saying. And try not to be overly technical, really, is really the point of that.
Yeah, I think that's really the art of communication for civil engineers, is that we need to sometimes be technical when we're trying to talk with other agencies or subconsultants. But when we're dealing with a board that consists of lay people, when we're dealing with residents on a property, we need to take those same technical backgrounds and details and kind of distill them down into something that's understandable and practical for the people that we're talking to, which is why I think communication is so important. And why we're doing a whole podcast episode on it is because it's almost like you have to speak a bunch of different languages as a civil engineer to be successful in your projects. For example, why are you building a big pond in the middle of my property, right? Like, well, we need to catch the stormwater and we need to hold it back a little while before we let it all out, type of thing. But you have to be able to explain that. So I do think that, sure, that comes with time, getting better at this. But I do think Jackie makes some good points in that sometimes you may have to explain it a couple different ways for different people just until they can kind of grab onto the one that makes sense to them, because it's not something that is going to necessarily be different people are going to have to just hear it a different way, digest it a different way. And I always thought that was a challenging thing about civil engineering. I know for myself, going to like planning board meetings and zoning board meetings, and you're dealing with different professionals that are not engineers, right? And so, but yet they're responsible for giving you an approval for your project. So you need to try to explain it to them. So.
Right. What I love when I talk about stormwater and detention, and I'm sure you've used this too, I talk about the bathtub.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good way to do it, right?
The bathtub. You turn on the shower and you just plug that bathtub, and we're just going to hold that water until the storm kind of passes, and we're going to slowly release the water out. And that's really like the tension, whether it's a pond, an underground system, a roof, a green roof, it's the tension. So sometimes I see them recognize that when I say bathtub, just hold the water and then release it slowly.
Right. Yeah. And that's actually a really good approach in general in this situation, is trying to come up with analogies for people, because, if they don't understand the technical side of it, you could probably bring it to some kind of practical analogy that they do see on a regular basis that can make them say, oh, okay, I kind of see what you're kind of doing there. And there's other aspects of this too. I know I worked on a project once where it was like an old car dealership that was kind of abandoned, and I think it was like a plumbing wholesale supply contractor wanted to come in there and take it over and use the property. And the board was giving us so much trouble about the parking layout and trucks coming through the parking lot, over and over and over, repeatedly. And finally, at one point, we just had to tell them, listen, this is a property that's been vacant, and this company wants to come in and bring jobs to the municipality, be a tax base, do a whole bunch of good stuff here. And we knew this parking lot has operated in the past, so I don't know why we have to go through this over and over with them, because we may lose them. You may lose them, right? So I think sometimes they need to understand what's at stake here, right? I mean, you have engineers working on it. They want to do a good job. You can work back and forth with them practically. But at some point, you have to understand that you're also responsible for upgrading these sites, right? Bringing new business into the town. So there has to be a good working back and forth. And I think the engineer plays a big role in that relationship between the board and their client, right? And that's really important. And as a municipal engineer, you're kind of representing that board in a sense.
Right.
So you have the ability from that aspect as well. So you mentioned the word grant there. I want to talk about that a little bit. You've prepared and you've managed capital budgets for a lot of different types of infrastructure projects. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to securing and managing grant funding and how this impacts kind of the success of a project? Because a lot of civil engineers maybe that listen haven't done that yet, but maybe we'll be getting into that with some of the new funding that's going to be available here.
Sure. So most of the projects that towns engage us in have some form of grant funding. Probably the most important part to know about grant funding is what are the rules in this when you accept this money. So, for example, federal funds, you get a lot of it, but it comes with a lot of obligations. Some of them are so restrictive that the town ends up paying almost the same amount of money in fees than it is to get the grant. They want, for example, federal government will give you $500,000 to $1 million in grant money for an infrastructure project, but they want full-time inspectors on site. That could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on how long the project is, but that is a requirement. So you have to know and advise the client, this is this grant, but you'll have to pay this much for it. What really is your goal? And there's a grant for every project that you can imagine. The key is you have to know what the rules are. You have to follow their rules. You have to spend their money when they want you to spend the money and follow their rules. The quicker it is you can spend the money and fulfill those grant requirements, the quicker that they remember that this town or this client or this firm makes their life easier in spending the money. So the next time around, they will give you more money. They'll say, okay, this person knows how to spend my money. The goal of my agency is to be able to show progress. So as long as you follow their rules and know what their rules are and submit things at the right time and the right size paper and everything else, you will be successful in securing more grants in the future from them. Also knowing that the grant agencies, their personnel will be there for decades. So you might want to fight a requirement, but just know that they're going to be the same people that you're going to be dealing with. So you might not want to push that as much as you want to, especially when they're giving you money. Completely different thing when you're trying to get a permit,
right?
As you may know. But when somebody's giving you free money, you have to deal with it a little bit better or in a different way than, say, a permitting agency.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I think the big takeaway there is know the rules. I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't have a class on grant funding in engineering school. So it's obviously something that if you're involved in this as a civil engineer, you've got to read up on the rules, right? If you're going to play a game, you got to know what rules to play by or else you're going to be in trouble. And I do like what Jackie said in that if you get good at it, like anything else, then you may get rewarded because that municipality maybe say, hey, T&M's doing a great job or this municipality is doing a great job. Next time they apply for funds, we have that in the back of our mind that, they followed all the rules and they did a good job at it. And so I think that's really an analogy for your career in life, right? If you're good and you give good service to people, they're going to come back for more. And the same thing applies here. And I think that a lot of engineers may be scared by funding or the idea of funding and everything that goes along with it. But I would imagine that if you get really good at it, it can be a really good benefit and service to your clients because you can help them acquire those funds. And then, as Jackie's saying, use them effectively in the right way and then be able to get more. So, and listen, the world that we live in now, infrastructure policies and funding, all that stuff, this is going to be more and more important going forward. So the better you get at it, the more value you can drive to your clients. And that's really what we try to do in this industry effectively.
Right.
So, Jackie, I'm going to ask you if you could think of a time when maybe proactive communication with residents helped to mitigate some challenges during an infrastructure project. I think being proactive is so important.
Absolutely. One of the projects that I worked on, again, another roadway job, we had to resurface the road, but we also had to solve some of the flooding issues in that road. And on paper, we thought we had everything solved. Right? We sized the pipes correctly. We put it in the low spot. We discharged it to the right place. And as I'm going through my neighborhood meeting with my plans, one of the residents, this was an entire neighborhood, one of the residents says, well, what about that sump pump discharge at the top of the hill? And I'm like, it's the top of the hill. I'm getting the water at the bottom of the hill. I don't have to go to the top of the hill to get that water. And we walked over there, and lo and behold, this is the only reason there was a drainage problem in that neighborhood, was because somebody's sump pump was kept going and going and going. It was eroding the road.
Wow.
So the inlet, catch basin that we proposed hundreds of feet away wasn't really going to solve that. It would still keep running downhill and eroding any new roadway. So knowing that that was there and it kept flowing and we couldn't change the fact that it was flowing, we extended our drainage system to connect into that sump pump system sooner rather than later. So that, had we not done that, or had nobody pointed that out, because on a survey, it just looks like PVC pipe along curved.
Sure.
Had nobody pointed that out, I'm sure we would have still, the lifespan of that road wouldn't last as long as it has been. Same neighborhood meeting, they said water comes up from the road. It doesn't come from the sky. It just bubbles up. And they said, why do you think it's called Indian Spring Road? And our minds were blown because, again, on paper, right, everything looked right. So we went back and added an under drain, and that was connected to an inlet. So we weren't just looking what was falling on the road, but also what was underground. And those two conversations with the residents of that community changed and impacted that project. And again, after those conversations, believe it or not, the most difficult people come to these public meetings saying, you guys really listened to us. And by listening to us, you solved our problem. You didn't just say, this is the only way to solve. You don't understand what you're saying. This is how we're solving it. Right. You actually listened, you changed, you modified your design, and you worked with us, and it works. And it was more of a community project, in my opinion, than just an engineering project. People want to be involved. People want to have a say in front of their properties. And I thought that was one of the most successful projects that we've had.
Yeah, and I think that drives home a really good point. I know before we said that the residents aren't always technically savvy like an engineer, but they do have a lot of good information about the property and about the surroundings, because that is their home, essentially. So just because they may not be able to tell you a stormwater equation or know anything about detention doesn't mean that they can't tell you things that are going to help you solve the problems better and faster. And so, being proactive, taking a site walk with the residents beforehand, maybe getting the contractor involved like we talked about before, can maybe uncover some of these things that can make the design much more efficient in the long run. Whereas if you didn't know those things, like you said, maybe the roadway doesn't last as long as it does because of the information that you got from them. So those are great lessons. So Jackie, how do you tailor your communication strategies when dealing with different types of stakeholders like planning boards and zoning boards and redevelopment agencies? What does that look like?
You really have to get to know them. You really do. Every town is different. Every board is different. From my perspective, kind of not the same as yours. I would think you have to present more to them, whereas I have to become their trusted advisor.
Okay.
Right? And for me to become their trusted advisor, to be their engineer, I have to make sure that I prove to them that I understand their town and their needs. And the only way to do that is to make sure that I have a conversation with them before these meetings to say, hey, do you have any questions about this? Can I answer some of your questions? Do you think this is a good application or a bad application? We have conversations where I ask them, where does it hurt? What is your biggest pet peeve about this particular project or not? And then we just have that conversation back and forth to say, where they'll ask me, is stormwater good here? And I'll say, they could probably use a couple more pipes, or, so there's always a conversation with all the boards about what they think is important. Some people, they don't care about store border. They care about traffic. So it's important to just understand what the client wants or what the board wants in that particular town, because it's never going to be the same.
That's great. So basically, regardless of whoever you're communicating with whatever board it is, whatever agency it is, you need to understand kind of their needs, their goals, their desires, and then you need to kind of build trust with them and become that trusted advisor so that they feel that you're the person that they can trust to help them like achieve these goals, essentially.
Correct.
That's great. That sounds like a great approach. All right. So what final piece of advice can you share with civil engineers that are looking to improve their communication skills, especially when it comes to working on these kind of community-driven projects? What are some last pieces of advice or takeaways you can share with them?
I would say know your project and know your community. Without those, it doesn't matter if you're talking at a higher level or a lower level. People know when you don't know your project and you don't know their neighborhood. So know your project and neighborhood is the first thing. The second thing is be concise. Don't ramble on. Just be concise with your project and what you're trying to get them to hear. Listen to them. Take notes about what they're saying and make sure you transfer that information down the line. Because believe me, if they told you and they have to repeat it to a contractor 5 other times, they're calling you up and they're saying like, why did I even talk to you? So I would say know your project, be concise, listen to people, and call them back and take notes.
Those are all great pieces of advice, and I think they're going to be really helpful for our listeners. And kind of the one thing that I take away from that entire answer is you could design the identical project in 5 different municipalities, but it really becomes 5 separate projects because of, like you said, the town is different, flooding patterns are different, people are different, right? Regulations are different, grant regulations are different. And so really that's what's kind of, to me, is kind of exciting about being in civil engineering, is that every project, even though it appears to be the same, is going to present a lot of different challenges and opportunities for you. And I think doing some of the things around communication that Jackie talked to us about today can really help you to be successful on your projects. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and we're going to wrap up by putting Jackie on the civil engineering hot seat. We'll be right back. All right, I'm back here with Jackie Dirmann. Jackie is a licensed professional engineer, municipal engineer, and client manager at T&M Associates. She talked with us a lot today about how to communicate more effectively on your projects, especially dealing with residents and municipalities and contractors. And now we're going to wrap up by asking Jackie a couple of career-related questions on the civil engineering hot seat. Ready, Jackie?
Sure.
All right. So first question, do you have any specific rituals or routines that you practice every day? For example, maybe a morning routine or a lunchtime routine, or just something that you do consistently on a daily basis that has contributed to your success as a professional?
I would say I'm a morning person. Okay. I start earlier than everybody because it just gives me kind of a head start in the emails and phone calls. So I make sure that I go through everything that's come in that night or during the day, and I flag the ones that need more attention in terms of emails, and everything else that can be handled simply I take care of before the day starts. When it's a longer response or I need more time to get back to people, I make sure that I tell them that I received, their information and that I'll get back to them either at the end of day tomorrow or whatever it is. I find that doing that kind of centers me in that I'm not looking backwards, like, what did I forget? So throughout the day, if I know that I'm going to be away from my computer, say on site visits the whole day, I'll let people know as the emails come in, hey, I'm on a site visit. I won't be able to come back. So they know why I'm not answering emails that quickly or why it's taking me some time. I also like to plan out I like to look at I have 2 screens. I have my calendar and I have my email because I like to try to plan whether I'm going to be working in front of the computer all day or whether I'm going out on site visits 2 or 3 times a week. And I try to just manage my time so that I'm not going in and out all the time.
That's great. So you're doing a lot of prioritization of tasks and planning, weekly planning, daily planning, which sounds very important for a civil engineer because of all the potential different things you have to do on a weekly basis. And I do think that we do some productivity and time management training. And I do think one of the biggest challenges for technical professionals is task prioritization, right? We know we have a lot of stuff to do, but there should be an order in which we do it. Because if we're doing the least important tasks first, that's probably not very effective, essentially. So I like the idea of really taking time to prioritize tasks.
Right. So there's actually, and I know I said I didn't want to talk about a book, but there was a book that was given to me, and it was just the title that kind of got to me. I don't know if you've read it. Eat That Frog.
I've heard of it. Like basically saying do the hard things first.
Do the hardest things first, and the rest of your day will be easier. So make that like difficult phone call or have that difficult meeting first, and the rest of it will be easier. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that sometimes I do try to get the hardest thing done in the beginning of the day.
Okay. And you just answered a question that you told me to cross out. So there you go. So we got that question answered, which is great. All right. So the other question that I have for you is, if you think about your managers throughout your career, and you don't have to name names, but just if you thought about some of your favorite managers, what made them your favorite? Like just trying to understand in the civil engineering industry, what makes for a really memorable, inspirational, great manager?
So my second job, I had an awesome manager. My first job, not so much. I was new at what I was doing and I just needed to learn. Sure. Somebody teach me what telecommunications is, what municipal engineering. I just wanted somebody to teach me. And I wasn't getting that in my first job. So that's why I was looking for somebody to teach me. And my second job, I had a manager who was just so patient. He was like a professor.
Right.
He was so knowledgeable. He was a surveyor, an engineer, a municipal engineer. He was like the Energizer bunny in terms of how hard he worked. You could ask him any question. He just loved what he did. And he just shared that love with everyone that worked for him. And we just wanted to meet his expectations all the time, right? We just wanted to work for this man because he explained every single thing. Why are we doing this? So, and I think working with him for 10 years has changed the way I am and has made me love what I do. I want to be just like him because he was just so hardworking, kind, smart. The clients used to say he was like Superman.
Wow.
They would think of a problem and he would fly in and he would fix it.
Well, that's a good thing to be thought of. Yeah.
Yeah, he is a great guy.
So he needs to be the next person I interview for this podcast.
Oh my God,
right?
Yes. Oh, you need like 5 hours though.
So next episode, we're going to have Superman on the podcast. Be sure to tune in for that. No, one last question I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask you it because of what you said earlier. You came to this country to start your career. And I know a lot of civil engineers here in the US that did the same thing. And I'm just wondering if there's any kind of tips that you could give people that are international that come here to work here to build a career, just from your career, any takeaways that you can give them?
Sure. I'm a person that asks a lot of questions. I do. I don't pretend to know something that I don't know. I will research it, talk to people, make sure I really understand what I'm doing. So I think, whether you come from a different country or a different state,
sure,
you have to have that thirst of knowledge, right? Like you, as an engineer, you should want to know what you're doing and not just try to shortcut things. So I would say, start understanding what the needs are of, the job market or what you're applying for. Also know that you don't have to be an expert in everything. You can be great at a couple of things and understand the value of a team. The team is such a great thing that you could pull people in when you want to have a more detailed discussion about detention or traffic or environmental. Like there are so many people that you can learn from if you want to learn, if you want to understand the subject. So I would just encourage people to always just want to learn and grow, no matter what country you're from, no matter how old you are, no matter how experienced you are, you're always going to learn from the next person. And as a team, especially in a consulting firm, that's your leverage, right? You have all these people that if I can't get you the answer, I can find someone to get you that answer. So I think for me, that in any job that I do, that's worked out in making me a more experienced, a well-rounded engineer overall.
That's great. No, I love that. I mean, it's basically regardless of whether it's, like you said, it's another country, another company, another state. I think sometimes when we come in as new, we're afraid to ask questions because we don't want people to think that we don't know enough type of thing. But I think we have to always continue to learn and, get as much information as we can so we can do the best job we possibly can, like you said, and drive the most value, which is what you're really trying to do in your career. So, well, Jackie, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Civil Engineering Podcast. I really do appreciate the time. You shared some great, I think, insights around communication on your projects and certainly some great career tips here in the last few minutes. So I thank you for taking some time out of your day.
Thank you so much for this experience.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jackie. She gave us some awesome communication tips and also career advancement tips as well. If you enjoyed the interview, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.